everyone, and welcome to the final webinar in the Katana 5 series. Some quick introductions for those of you who haven't joined the previous sessions. I'm Ruth, I'm a creative specialist for Katana here at Foundry, and we're also going to be joined by Gary Jones, who's the product manager for lighting, and Charlie Holt, the associate product manager for Katana. And we're all going to be available after this session for a live Q&A. So in this session, I'm going to be demonstrating how to build a procedural material mask for applying snow or dust or moss or anything similar to the top surface of an object, so it appears to have fallen and then settled on the surface. I'm going to be using 3D Light and building the material with the intention of packaging it up in a shading macro, which is a new feature of 5.0. By doing this, it can be shared and reused between artists and across as many assets, projects, and shows as needed. I'll also show you how to promote parameters to create an interface for really quick edits to the nodes within, so that the mask and resulting effect can be customized without needing to find specific nodes or parameters. And by doing this, you can build a library of these material macros and really help to speed up the look development process. So jumping right in, as I said, I'm going to be using 3D Light for this demo. You can use another renderer to create the shading macros as well, but because Katana ships with 3D Light, I want to keep it simple for anyone who wanted to give this a go themselves. So a quick overview of the scene. I have an asset and a camera setup, and then I have a material and assignment. I'm going to talk through that in a moment. I have some lights, which is just a very simple setup with an HDRI. And then I have the render settings here as well. So jumping into the material network, you can see we have a DL principled, which is 3D Light's interpretation of Disney's principled BRDF shader. And then I've plugged in some texture files. So we have the diffuse color, the roughness, specular, metallic. And then we have a displacement shader as well with a texture map plugged in. So this is the base material for a lion, as we can see in the render. And now I can start building the mask for the snow. So just to give an overview of what we're going to be doing, we're going to use a DL layered material, which lets us layer up two complete materials. And then we're going to add a mask, which is what we're going to be focusing on and building in the session. So we already have the material for the base layer, which will be the line material, and we just need another material for the snow. So I'm going to create a DL principled node and plug it into the DL surface color output so that I can quickly change some parameters and see the result. I'll change the color to white. I don't want it to be completely white, so I'm going to tint it a little with blue. And I'll also reduce the roughness and increase the specular to try and match the appearance of snow. And then I'm going to add some refraction as light refracts through all the crystals that build up the snow surface. I'm not going to spend as much time as I could getting this snow shader perfect. But in general, when creating materials like this, doing a little bit of research on how certain types of material responds to light can really help a lot to get it looking more accurate. So after a quick bit of Googling, I found that snow absorbs more of both red and yellow light, which means that blue light travels through the snow more. So that's why snow can often appear slightly blue, especially when it's newly fallen. So because of this, I'm going to tint the refraction color a little bit blue, and this is going to help give us a more accurate representation for our material. If I wanted to, I could also add a bump map as well to bring some texture, but I'm going to leave it for now as I want to focus in this session more on the mask creation and building that interface for the macro. So now I have the snow material and a base material for my asset. I just need to mask out the snow so that it's only applied to the top surfaces. And with this in mind, the first step is to think about how to get the mask to target just those top surfaces of the asset. So the areas that are facing upwards and that would likely catch snow or dust when it falls. Well, luckily 3D Light has a great node for this, called the Triplanar node. Now, this node is designed to provide an artist-friendly way to map textures onto a 3D object without needing to UV that object first. It works by sectioning the object into different regions based on their X, Y, or Z direction. I'll create a triplanar node and we can have a look at what this does visually. I'm also going to create a DL principled that I can plug the node into so we can visualize this output. And if we have a look at the out color, it doesn't give us anything helpful. But if we look at the out mask, this is what's going to help us target that top surface. So you can see that the green areas correspond to the y-axis, which is what we want, as this is where the snow or dust would settle if it were to fall onto this object. So we could use this as it is, as a mask. However, if we have a closer look, you can see that the green areas are not just from the top down, but also from the bottom up. So this isn't exactly what we want, as there wouldn't be a buildup of snow underneath the object. So instead, if we have a quick look in the parameters for this node, we can change the mode to planar. And this is just a usual planar projection, but it will give us a more accurate map of where we want the snow to fall. You can see that just the top areas are being targeted, and there's also a nice fall off happening. So we can use this as a basis for our mask. So at this point, we can use this mask and see what it looks like with our materials. To do this, I'm going to need to layer these materials up. So I'll create a layered material. So here I'm using the keyboard shortcuts Alt 1, 2, and 3 to expand and collapse these nodes as and when I need to. In 5.0, these can now be switched between using the toggle on the node itself as well. So I'll create a layered material, plug the snow into the top layer and the base material into the middle layer. And now if you hover over the top mask input on the layered material node, you'll see that it takes a float, but the out mask from the triplanar node is a color data type. So these can't be connected just yet. So what we're going to do is convert the color to a float using the useful color to float node provided in 3Delight. And this node lets us choose a mode. And we have red, green, and blue as potential options. So looking at the planar mask again, we can see that we want to isolate the yellow sections without targeting the green. So I'm going to try the red mode and see what we get. So this seems to have worked pretty well. The correct sections are being targeted, but our snow isn't looking too convincing just yet. It's not a bad start, but we can now start really refining the appearance by breaking up the block coverage of the mask and adding some fall off and more variation. And there's a lot of different ways that we can choose to do this, but the first thing I'm going to do is take a look inside the triplanar parameters and see if there's anything we can change here to make any improvements. And I'll switch back to the DL principled for the out mask so we can see a bit more clearly what effects these changes are having. Before I start just randomly making changes to these parameters, I'm going to have a look at the 3Delight documentation for the triplanar node and see if there's anything that may be useful for us here. So the softness parameter here controls the blending between the regions. So if I increase this, then the border between the different sections are going to be blurred, giving a more smooth transition in our mask. And this could result in better fall off from the snow. We also have a noise intensity and noise scale parameter, which control the noise used to blend between these sections. This could also be useful in our case, as there would be a bit of irregularity around the edges where some pieces of snow land and where some don't, and perhaps some snow falls off the edges as well. So we can play around with these and get a result that starts to look good. While I'm making these changes, I'm also thinking about which parameters would be useful to promote in the future when we come to building the material interface, so I can control the look of the mask. Something to remember is if your object is animated, then you'll need to change from world space to object space to prevent any sliding or movement of the mask area. I'm going to do this even though this object isn't animated, because I may want to apply a rotation to render out a turntable. So I'm pretty happy with this so far, but the snow is still looking a little bit too solid and blocked out, especially in these flatter areas. So to fix this, we can blend the mask with some noise to break it up a little. And 3D Light has a few shading nodes that we can use for this, depending on the result that you're looking for. In this case, I think a fractal node is going to do just what we want. So again, I'm going to plug this color output directly into the principled shader, and then plug that into the DL surface output so that I can see exactly what this node is doing. And as I'm connecting these nodes, you'll notice that I don't need to manually expand all the nodes out to find the correct port. This is a really nice feature of 5.0, and that is that shading nodes now auto-expand for incoming connections. And when they do, they'll only show the ports which would result in a valid connection. And then once connected, they collapse back to their previous state. This is one of my favorite improvements of this release, as it just makes building material networks so much quicker and so much easier. As of Katana 5, I now also have the option to hide any of these connections in my material network. So if I want to reduce the amount of visual clutter, I can hide these connections so that I can focus more on the nodes that I'm actually working with. And there's also a keyboard shortcut to do this as well, which is Alt-H. You may notice that the shading nodes have been redesigned a little bit in this release to help keep them as space efficient as possible. We've reduced the size, removed any duplicate information that wasn't necessary. And as well as this, the dot node has been redesigned, so this can now be used to enforce straight edge connections in your network. It's also smaller and much easier to use, as you can simply click on the dot and drag it in any direction rather than having to find the connection point. So as you can see, there's lots of really nice improvements to user experience when working in the network materials space within Katana. These features and enhancements have really been designed to help artists work much more quickly and efficiently, and allow your shading node networks to be as clear and easy to navigate as possible. And then I'll jump into the parameters and have a little play around with these values. So I'll increase the ratio to bring out the effect, make it a bit more visible. And now we can really see what this fractal pattern is doing. And it's creating these nice areas that are going to break up the snow. And I can already see that this is going to work quite well for the purpose that we need it. So I'll carry on making some adjustments. I can increase the threshold and reduce the amplitude, and just experiment with these parameters to get a result that I'm happy with. There is a lot of trial and error here, just experimenting a little bit to find something that looks right. Because this is all procedural, we can at any point jump back to any of these nodes and make edits. So I'm not too worried about creating a perfect result just yet. And I can imagine roughly how this is going to look, as the black areas are going to mask the snow. But now would be a good time to view this mask in the context of our materials. So to do this, I'm going to need to use a color blend before converting the color output to a float, as I need to combine the triplanar with the fractal pattern that we've just created. So I'll plug the fractal into the foreground and the triplanar into the background. In this case, it doesn't really matter which way around these are plugged in, because of the blending mode that we're going to be using. And then I'll add the out color from the color blend to the color to float input and plug the layered material into the DL surface output again. Now, this hasn't blended these two masks as we expected, so I'm going to need to change the blend mode to multiply to get the result that we want. And now you can see that the snow is being nicely broken up by the fractal pattern, and it's working quite well. So we've got some nice uneven coverage, looking a little bit more realistic here. And the last thing that I'm going to do is create a color correction node between the color blend and the color to float, so that I can make some finer adjustments to the mask such as increase the contrast, to reduce the amount of grey areas, and increase the distinction between the black and white areas. And we can also play around with the exposure as well to give a little bit of extra control. So I'm starting to feel quite pleased with how this mask is looking. I'm going to stop here and show you how we can package it all together in a shading group and build that material interface. So shading groups are a really great way to organize your shading node network into different sections. For example, we can create a shading group for the base material by highlighting everything and hitting G, as we would for a regular group in the root node network. And then if we jump inside and have a look, the connections are preserved by linking them up to this sidebar, which means those ports are accessible from the outside of the group. I'm going to do the same for the mask. So first I can delete this DL principled, as that was just to test things out and we don't need it anymore. And then I'm going to make a shading group for the mask. And now firstly, our network looks a lot tidier and easier to navigate. So I'll give these groups names and make it even more clear what's going on. And then before I show you how to create a macro from this group, I'm going to promote some parameters so I can access them from the material level, and I don't have to jump inside to find specific nodes. So as I mentioned, as we've been going along, I've been making a mental note of which of the parameters might be useful to allow us to have control over the look of this mask for this asset or any other asset we want to apply it to. So if we start with the triplanar node, the softness parameter, we'll remember, controls the blending between the different regions. So if I increase it, I can give the impression of more fall off. This would be a useful one to have control over, so I'm going to promote it by adding it to the material interface. The noise parameters I don't really need to change, as they will affect the placement of the snow and give slightly unrealistic results, so I will leave these. And then inside the fractal node, we can decrease the amplitude to reduce the overall quantity of snowfall. This could be useful. Increasing the threshold reduces the gaps in the snow, so this would also be a good one to have access to, as it could be used to control something like the overall coverage of the snow. And then jumping into the color correction, we're working with a mask, so we don't need to control any of the parameters that are going to affect the color. But as I said before, the contrast parameter can be used to reduce the gray areas of the mask and provide a more or less stark difference between the black and the white areas. So this will be the areas of snow and then the areas of no snow. And this can help affect the overall area that's affected by the snow. So this could be a useful parameter to have access to. And then finally, the exposure can be used to change the overall amount of snow or density of the snow. So I'll add this one too. And I'll leave it there as we have a good selection of controls now. So now that we've promoted these parameters, they're going to appear in the material interface inside the parameters for the network material create node. So I'm going to jump into these and we can organize the interface so that it can be passed to other artists, and we're going to make it really, really clear what parameters are going to do what. So just to note, I've jumped into the material parameters by hovering over the trail here and pressing E. And I can also do this to access the shading group parameters. And we can now jump in and make edits to each parameter to change how it's shown in the material interface. So I don't want the parameters organized into their original separate pages, as I don't think it's necessary. So I'm going to remove this. And just to note, we could have edited each parameter at the point of promoting it, but I prefer to make the edits and organize them now, all in one go, so that I can be sure that I'm being consistent. I'm also going to change the name and label of each parameter so it describes the effect on the mask and the overall material result, rather than the specific node parameters. This is common practice as often artists are going to be handed these materials, and it really helps to have a clear interface with really easy to understand parameters. So as we experimented with these parameters before, we established why we might want to promote them and how they might be able to alter the appearance of our material. So the contrast parameter can be used to control the overall area that's affected by the snow. So I'm going to call it something like spread. The exposure can be used to control the density of the snow. The amplitude affects the gaps, breaking up the snow, so I'm going to call that coverage. The threshold controls the overall snowfall amount. And then the softness controls the fall off. So now I've given the parameters some clearer names. They're much easier to understand for anyone that we may want to pass this material on to. If we jump back to the parameters on the shading group, in the Material Interface tab, we can add these exposed parameters and then reorder them from this level to organize them to flow a little bit better. This reordering is respected up to the parent level, so if I jump back to the material parameters, we can see that the parameters have been ordered in the same way here. And then the last thing I want to show you when setting up a material interface is the name and page prefixes in the shading group parameters. Using this, we can set a prefix for the name or page so that they can really easily be distinguished between other parameters if there are any other parameters that have been promoted to the same Network Material Create node. This is really handy to help avoid naming conflicts and keep it really clear what parameter or set of parameters controls what material or set of nodes. So I'm going to add a snow mask prefix to both of these. And then if we jump back to the material parameters, we can see that a page has been created as there wasn't one already. And if there was one, then this would be a prefix to the existing page. Also, if we hover over the individual parameters, then you can see the name prefix too. So this is a really nice way to keep your material interface organized and make sure that it's always obvious which parameters are affecting which section of your shading node network. So now we've set up the shading group and we've exposed parameters to the material. We're now ready to save this out as a macro. The ability to create macros within the network material space is a new feature of Katana 5. And we can create macros from any shading node or shading group node inside the network material space. They work in the same way as regular macros in the root node graph. So once saved, I can select this macro from the tab menu and place it down in my network again. I'm also going to save this snow material out as a macro just for really quick reusability when I apply this to another asset. It really doesn't matter how simple or complex your nodes or network are, anything can be saved out as a macro in this way to help save time and work more efficiently. Great, so now I have a reusable and shareable macro for creating this mask. And it was really quick and easy to create this macro in general. And by doing this and using the same techniques, we can build up a library of masks or full materials to share across projects and between artists. So I'm going to open up another project to demonstrate this. So here we have a dragon asset with materials set up already. I'll drop down the snow material and the snow mask and then layer them in the same way as before with the existing base material. And now in the render, we can see that the snow is applied to the dragon asset as well. And once this macro is connected in, the promoted parameters will be added to the material interface. So we can use this to make nice quick edits and customize the look of this material too. Before we finish, I just want to show you how we can use this mask with any other material to create a huge variety of effects. For example, here I have the same line asset that we started with, a different lighting setup and the same base material. And I want to add some moss to the top surface here. So I've saved out a new version of our snow mask called Moss Mask. It's the exact same setup with some adjustments to the noise intensity parameter in the triplanar to give a little bit less of a uniform placement. I also have a moss material that I can bring in, and I can now use these in the same way as the snow to layer my base material and moss material up and mask out the areas to apply the moss to. As you can see, this is a really fast and easy way of creating new material setups for many different purposes. And as you continue to build more materials and more masks, you can create much more variety as well. In the material interface, we have really clear sections for the mask and the material, and so quick changes can be made to suit whatever scene and asset these materials are being applied to. There is so much scope to how these shading macros can be used, and they really play into the idea that in Katana, artists should never have to do the same task twice. And with the other enhancements to the network material space, it's really never been easier to quickly build, share, and reuse your materials. So there we have it. We've created a material mask that can be really easily shared and reused as many times as needed across as many projects as you like. We've built a custom interface so artists can pick up this macro and have access to everything that they need without even needing to jump inside the group. And we've seen how quick and easy it is to apply it to another asset. Thank you everyone for watching.